Hi, I have prepared the most interesting collection of historical photos for you. These are only real true shots from the past. In 1983, Wakefield Prison built Robert Maudsley a reinforced underground glass cell after he killed 3 inmates in custody, men described as rapists or child abusers. He's still there today, spending about 23 hours a day alone behind transparent walls. A farmer keeps plowing as smoke from NATO's 1999 air campaign against Yugoslavia, Operation Allied Force, towers over his fields. The bombing lasted 78 days. After the Great Blizzard of 1888, New York's street-spanning telegraph and power lines snapped under ice and wind, collapsing poles like matchsticks and cutting communication for days. The storm buried parts of the city under deep drifts. In Hiroshima, streetcars were back in service just 3 days after the atomic bombing, August 9, 1945, making the tram a rolling sign that the city hadn't died. On September 23, 1952 in Philadelphia, 37-year-old heavyweight champ Jersey Joe Walcott, who debuted in 1930, pushed Rocky Marciano hard before Marciano erased it all with a 13th round KO to win the title. During France's liberation in 1944-45, crowds carried out the Épuration Sauvage, Wild Purge. Women accused of horizontal collaboration with German soldiers were dragged out, had their heads shaved, and were paraded through their towns, often with no trial. A Finnish soldier in the Winter War, 1939-40, carries a Molotov cocktail, a glass bottle of fuel meant to torch Soviet tanks at point-blank range. The name was bitter sarcasm aimed at Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. U.S. Army troops of the 9th Infantry Division fire from the jungle along the South Vietnam-Cambodia border in 1970, during the cross-border push meant to hit enemy sanctuaries. Passengers file beneath a gigantic Zeppelin inside its hangar in the 1930s. These airships were essentially flying ocean liners, carrying diners, lounges, and sleeping berths on long-distance routes. 850 feet underground in Colorado's Hubert Mine, Nevadaville, 1895. A miner poses riding an ore bucket while others stand behind him with candle lamps. Look closely. There's a trapdoor with rails so the ore car could roll over a shaft when it was shut. 1965. Ford tested a wrist twist steering control instead of a wheel, meant to reduce arm strain and keep the dash more visible. It looked futuristic, but drivers hated the feel and confirmed it was tougher to make fast, instinctive corrections. 28th of October, 1939. This Heinkel. He-111H2 crashed near Humby, East Lothian after flak damage and a finishing attack by 2 RAF Spitfires, often cited as the first German bomber brought down on British soil in World War II. Early 1945 near Brachland/Randerath, Germany. U.S. combat engineers with the 102nd Infantry Division sweep a snow-choked field with mine detectors so infantry and vehicles can move without being blown apart. Washington, October 15, 1936. U.S. Navy safety engineer William P. Biggs demos a sandblasting helmet built to stop abrasive grit and dust from shredding eyes and scarring lungs. Silicosis was a known killer in the trade. Omelia Village, July 25, 1941. A wounded Soviet POW is handed water and tobacco moments after capture on the Eastern Front. The photo freezes a brutal summer of 1941 in one small act of mercy beside a truck bed. Early 1900s, McDonald, Washington County. The Champion coal washer towers over the field, where raw coal was blasted with water to strip away shale and dirt. Before it ever reached a furnace, this machine cleaned coal on site by cutting ash and waste for a hotter. Near Cameron Barracks in Inverness, new recruits of the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders practice throwing a kapok bridge across the water. Timber decking supported by canvas floats stuffed with kapok fiber. In 1942, at the Central Ordnance Depot in Weedon, England, 2 women of the Auxiliary Territorial Service inspect Lend-Lease Vickers machine guns as they are processed and crated for issue. This is the supply chain side of war. Counting, testing. In 1944, a United States Army Air Force's B-17G from the 391st Bombardment Group caught a German V-1 Doodlebug in flight, its white pulse jet flame visible as it skims over the countryside. The V-1 was an early cruise missile with roughly an 850-kilogram warhead. Edna Rivers, a champion lifter and close friend of Abby Pudgy Stockton, is shown training around 1946. She reportedly deadlifted 500 pounds at a body weight of about 150, over 3 times her weight. On July 28, 1851, Prussian photographer Johann Julius Friedrich Berkowski took the first successful photograph of a total solar eclipse in Königsberg using a daguerreotype plate and an 84-second exposure. Wing walking in the barnstorming era. A stuntman stands on a moving biplane's wing hundreds of feet over New Jersey, often with little more than handholds and nerve. One slip and the prop wash does not forgive. Barbara Clack doing a human water skis stunt. She is pulled across the water while standing on 2 men gripping tow handles like living skis, blasting through a wall of spray. One wrong shift in balance and everybody eats the wake. Inventor Fred J. Snyder tests a vision-inverting headset that flips the world upside down, then tries to pour a drink anyway, proving how hard your brain fights rewired sight. The spill is the experiment. Muscle memory fails fast when up and down swap. A man in traditional Dutch costume, giant steps over a miniature city in a classic forced perspective photo, turning real rooftops into toy blocks beneath his boots. Shots like this were often made to advertise model towns. A portrait of a Chippewa man, known as John Smith, photographed with a long pipe and a face carved by decades outdoors. Newspapers reportedly claimed he died at 137, but that age was never reliably verified. A start line like a dare. One runner, a handler with a dog, a cyclist, a motorcycle, and cars all launching together in a mixed transport race where speed depends on both legs and engines. It is the perfect snapshot of early 20th century anything-goes competition culture. A wing walker balances on a narrow strut outside a moving airplane, an aviation stunt made famous by 1920s to 1930s, barnstormers who performed with no parachute and nothing but grip strength and wind pressure, keeping them alive. Inside a German frontline dugout in 1917, bunks stacked like shelves, a hanging electric bulb, and personal gear tucked into a space dug deep enough to feel like a tiny underground room. Many German positions invested heavily in these shelters, built to survive shell fire. Alna, Maine, 1905. The Mason's wreck shows engine number 4 tipped into a brook, while engineer Ed Plummer and fireman Otis Quiney bailed out by jumping into the water and walked away, unhurt. Crews threw up a temporary bridge to keep trains moving. Maine, 1924. New England telephone and telegraph crews climb and brace snapped pole lines after a snowstorm, with whole runs of crossarms and wires dumped into the drifts. Keeping service alive meant rebuilding the long-distance highway by hand in sub-zero wind. South Harpswell, Maine, 1940s. Hundreds of wooden, round-top lobster traps are stacked like shingles outside a working shed, each one built to sit steady on the seafloor while funneling lobsters inside. Route 66, February 1956. An aerial view shows cars and trucks swallowed by wind-driven drifts between Glen Rio, New Mexico, and Amarillo, Texas. Flat open country with nothing to break the gale. Snow fell for 4 straight days across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Battle of Saipan, 1944. A U.S. Marine slumps behind a broken cart on a street turned into gray rubble, with smoke still rolling through the wreckage. The photo catches the island-hopping war at its most brutal. Great Depression, 1930s. Unemployed men walked city streets wearing sandwich board resumes, begging for a decent job, listing their age, family, skills, and even veteran status. World War I. Men of Maryland's 117th Trench Mortar Battery, 42nd Division, work a French 58mm Crapouillot mortar, a squat trench weapon built to drop heavy bombs into enemy dugouts at short range. Hebron-on-Tyne, 1917. Women at Palmer's Shipbuilding haul heavy timber through the yard to keep wartime shipbuilding alive while millions of men were at the front. Pittsburgh's Monongahela Incline opened in 1877, hauling people up Mount Washington on twin cable cars when the hillside was still packed with workers' neighborhoods. It is one of the rare 19th-century funiculars still operating in the United States. In 1969, the discovery of the giant Ekofisk offshore field set Norway on a path to oil wealth, and instead of burning it fast, the country built the Government Pension Fund Global, created in 1990, first deposit in 1996, to lock petroleum money away for future generations. In 1960, Manhattan, 80-year-old accordionist Lila Tiffany plays at a side entrance of Carnegie Hall, while the Night Symphony program looms behind her like a billboard for a world she cannot afford. Los Angeles, 1964. Bruce Lee poses with Dan Inosanto, the Filipino-American martial artist, widely credited with introducing him to the nunchaku that later became Lee's screen trademark. Great Depression. Penny auction, 1933. When a bank tried to sell off a neighbor's foreclosed farm, local farmers packed the sale, bid only a few cents, and scared off outside buyers. Afterward, they handed the livestock and equipment back to the original family. September 1960. FDA, physician pharmacologist Dr. Francis Kelsey refused to approve thalidomide, sold as Kevadon, until the company proved it was safe in pregnancy, blocking repeated pressure to rush it through. After Dachau's liberation in 1945, survivors crowded into bunks with paper and pencils to write the first letters in years, trying to find out who in their families was still alive. With U.S. troops and relief groups routing messages through Red Cross tracing networks, Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind in secret while recovering from a bad ankle injury in Atlanta, then published it in 1936 and won the 1937 Pulitzer Prize for the only novel she ever finished, even after it became a blockbuster. NASA stress-tested the early Mercury pressure suit by making astronauts do normal, awkward motions, like throwing and swinging, because a single lock joint in a pressurized suit could mean you could not reach a switch in space. Sister Mary Ellen is caught mid-approach, throwing with the same locked-in form you see in serious league bowling, eyes down lane, shoulders square, full follow-through. In mid-20th century America, bowling alleys were community hubs. Loretta Lynn stands with her father, Ted Webb, a Kentucky coal miner who died before he ever heard her sing. The man who worked underground to keep the family afloat is the reason her songs hit so hard. Real poverty, real grit, real love. Bronia Bronka. Klebanski, a teenage Kashariot courier in occupied Poland, smuggled weapons and intelligence for the Białystok ghetto uprising and helped save the ghetto's secret archive. After the ghetto's destruction, she kept running medicine, supplies, and arms to partisans. Alak, a Dachau subcamp, April 30, 1945. Newly freed prisoners in striped uniforms raise a homemade American flag as the U.S. 7th Army arrives. The photo captures the split second a death camp's power collapses. A Buffalo Bills Wild West ticket office wagon, early 1900s, part traveling theater, part hype machine, built to sell the frontier as live entertainment. Even the sign tells the story. Kids got their own cheap admission. National Woman's Party leaders pose outside their headquarters in 1920 with a Susan B. Anthony warning on the banner. No self-respecting woman should wish or work for the success of a party that ignores her sex. Just weeks later, the 19th Amendment was ratified. Occupied Paris, 1942. A Wehrmacht soldier sits with his French girlfriend on the steps, the quiet face of occupation. After liberation, many women accused of horizontal collaboration were publicly punished for relationships like this. Hebron, 1990. Israeli soldiers stand guard beside a wall, tagged with a Star of David, as tensions spike in the occupied city. The photo was taken after the Temple Mount shootings in Jerusalem, where Israeli border police killed at least 21 Palestinian worshippers. September 13, 1918, Saint Bosant, east of Saint Mihiel. Private Shook fights mud, not bullets, trying to free mules pulling an American ammunition wagon that has bogged down and stopped an entire column. February 3, 1954. Marilyn Monroe is photographed at a television station in Japan during her trip to the region to entertain United States troops in Korea. Prague, 1910. Officials inspect piles of Christmas trees after sellers were accused of fixing prices, turning the street into an emergency dump. Instead of holiday sales, hundreds of furs ended up abandoned in the open air. One of the first images of the Elephant's Foot Corium inside Chernobyl's Reactor 4, 1986, a lava-like mass made when nuclear fuel melted through concrete and steel. It was so radioactive that just minutes nearby could have been fatal. Tbilisi, 1991–92. Zviadists, loyal to President Zviad Gamsakhurdia, trade fire in the streets during the coup and civil war that toppled him and shattered Georgia's first years of post-Soviet independence. Prescott, Arizona, 1881–1894. The Horribles, a club of wealthy local businessmen, hijacked Frontier Days and 4th of July parades with extravagant spoof costumes, turning Main Street into a live satire. Japanese tailor soldier Shoichi Yokoi hid in the jungles of Guam for almost 28 years after the island fell in 1944, living in a hand-dug underground shelter and sewing clothes from plant fibers because he believed surrender was a lie. Found by local hunters on January 24, 1972. In February 1962, AT&T's new Andover, main Earth station rose in the snow like a secret bunker, its giant radome built to talk to Telstar before it even launched. Telstar lifted off July 10, 1962, and soon relayed the first live television signals across the Atlantic. July 1945, Berlin, a U.S. 2nd Armored Division. M4 Sherman rolls past shattered storefronts while civilians swarm it on foot and bicycle, staring at the new power in the streets. The war is over, but the city is still a burned-out shell. Banning No. 1 mine in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. A Pittsburgh Coal Company shaft that grew from 78 men shipping 58,307 tons in 1890 to 500 men producing 500,000 tons by 1951. It finally went dark in 1956, leaving the rails. Portland's Forestry Building was a showpiece of the 1905 Lewis and Clark Exposition, built from enormous unpeeled Douglas fir logs like a cathedral made of trees. It became a beloved city landmark until a 1964 fire erased it in hours. A 1922 city plow fleet, Mack trucks idle in a row, exhaust turning the air into a dark fog while fresh snow falls. The massive steel blades up front show how early cities fought winter with brute industrial force. In World War I Britain, women at E-Day Limited in St. Albans hand-covered tropical pith helmets for soldiers headed to the Empire's hottest fronts. Boulogne, September 1944, knocked out 3rd Canadian Division armor. Shermans and a Churchill Crocodile, the flamethrower variant built to burn defenders out of bunkers. This was Operation Well-Hit, the brutal push to crack Hitler's fortress port. South Fork Flathead River, Montana, circa 1949. The valley is being stripped bare for the future Hungry Horse Reservoir as crews clear-cut the banks and haul timber out by tugboat. Those floating scraps are hundreds of full logs lashed into a raft. Pittsburgh, July 1877. After Pennsylvania Railroad cut wages, strikes exploded nationwide, and the company brought in Philadelphia militia to break the walkout. When troops fired into the crowd and killed about 20, the city erupted, torching the rail yards. Early 1900s. Paris museum staff assemble a towering Diplodocus skeleton in a hall packed with fossils and specimen drawers, turning a 150-million-year-old giant into a public spectacle. Diplodocus was one of the longest dinosaurs ever found. Corbera, Uruguay, Argentina's tiny outpost on Thule Island, one of the most remote inhabited spots on Earth, sitting in the icy South Sandwich Chain near an active volcano. Built to assert a claim, it became a quiet flashpoint in the South Atlantic. In 1943, the Milice Française, Vichy France's paramilitary force, salutes Nazi power while hunting resistance fighters and helping round up Jews. After liberation, the milice became a symbol of collaboration, and many members were arrested, tried, or executed. A United States Air Force C-130 skims the runway at Khe Sanh in 1968, kicking out a pallet by low-altitude parachute extraction so it can deliver supplies without stopping under fire. Drops like this kept the besieged Marine base alive when the roads were cut. In Hondo, Texas, May 22, 1937, Ben Kincheloe, born into slavery, works his own garden, a quiet snapshot of freedom earned in dirt and sunlight. He lived long enough to see emancipation turn into ownership, one crop at a time. Gaddafi often appeared with an all-female security unit nicknamed the Amazonian Guard. Trained soldiers kept close for both protection and image-making. In photos like this, they are armed and positioned like elite bodyguards around a leader who wanted the world to see loyalty. A young Viet Cong fighter carries an RPG round through tall grass during the Vietnam War, one person hauling the payload of an anti-armor ambush on her shoulder. Women served not just as medics and couriers. A women's jiu-jitsu class in 1953 shows a clean hip throw on a padded floor, with students and an instructor watching close. Self-defense lessons like this were spreading fast as more women pushed into combat sports and practical training. Serbian soldiers rest in a trench on the Salonika, Macedonian front, 1918, rifles stacked along the bank. The Macedonian front helped break Bulgarian lines late in World War I. Chadian soldiers haul away a captured Libyan Milmi 24 attack helicopter after the Battle of Feta, 1987. The seized gunship became a trophy of one of Chad's biggest victories in the Toyota War. English schoolboys stare as physique model Steve Coates poses in briefs, 1964. It is a candid snapshot of how rare bodybuilding looked outside gyms back then. Barbers wore gauze masks during the 1918 Spanish flu while still giving shaves and haircuts. The scene feels modern, a pandemic, essential work, and improvising protection on the job. Japanese General Iwane Matsui rides into Nanjing on the 17th of December, 1937, reviewed by ranks of troops. He was later held responsible for atrocities committed during the Nanjing Massacre and executed after the war. Emilio Aguinaldo, President of the First Philippine Republic, boards the United States Navy ship Vicksburg after his capture in 1901. Al Capone's house in Chicago, photographed in 1929, an ordinary-looking home tied to one of the most notorious gang leaders of the Prohibition era. Students and staff pose at the Ottoman School for the Deaf and Mute in Istanbul around 1895, hands raised mid-gesture for a formal group portrait. A behind-the-scenes shot captures the chaos of the shopping mall chase in The Blues Brothers as a car smashes through a storefront while crew members crouch near the cameras. Filmed in September 1979. Australian Army nurse Lorna Fairweather survived the sinking of the Viner Brook after Singapore fell, only to be captured on Bangka Island in February 1942. She was among 21 nurses forced into the surf and shot by Japanese troops. Finnish sniper Simo Haiha, nicknamed the White Death in the 1939-40 Winter War, poses in the 1940s with his dog, Kila. He was a small, quiet farmer credited with 500-plus Soviet kills, achieved using iron sights in deep snow. Emory student Barbara Jane Mackle was kidnapped in Georgia in December 1968 and buried alive in a ventilated box, while her kidnappers demanded a $500,000 ransom. FBI agents found and rescued her after 83 hours underground, shaken and dehydrated, but alive. Reina Angelica Marroquin, vanished in 1969 after moving from El Salvador to New York and becoming pregnant by her married employer. In 1999, new homeowners found her remains hidden in a sealed basement barrel. In 1946, in Gdańsk, Poland, several former staff and guards from the Stutthof concentration camp were publicly hanged as thousands watched, a grim, controversial snapshot of how fast justice turned into spectacle after the war. A bomb attack wrecks the Palestine Post building in Jerusalem on February 1, 1948, killing 4 people and wounding dozens in an effort to silence the Jewish press during the tense months after the UN partition plan. In 1898, Duke Alexis of Russia rides in a Landau carriage that's been converted to run on an electric tractor up front instead of horses. Basically a royal plug-in hack for the carriage age. This photo is often shared as a 1949 Hollywood nightclub snapshot of a rising young actress posing with friends, years before she became a global star. A soldier plays a Garmin, Russian button accordion, during the 1992 Transnistria War, when Moldovan forces fought the breakaway region backed by local separatists and Russia's 14th Army. Arachukwu burns during the 1901 Anglo-Arrow War, when British forces moved to smash the Arrow Confederacy, the trade and political network that dominated much of southeastern Nigeria. The fall of Arachukwu ended Arrow autonomy. Afghan Mujahideen ride into Kabul in 1992 after the Soviet-backed government of Mohammad Najibullah collapsed when Russian support dried up. 1898. The world's largest tricycle, built with wagon-sized wheels so tall that riders had to climb up like a ladder. It's basically a human-powered parade machine, part bicycle, part Victorian engineering flex. Hideki Hachisuka's Typhoon, Japan, 1979, captures a waterspout funnel twisting down over the sea as people stand on the beach below. Waterspouts are rotating columns of air over water, basically a tornado at sea, that can come ashore and cause damage. The Beatles walked down the Champs-Élysées in 1964 at the peak of Beatlemania during their Paris visit. In the background is the Arc de Triomphe, one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. British soldiers carry a rescued child through the rubble of a bombed French city in 1944 during the Allied push to retake France after D-Day. Streets like this were left shattered by artillery and air raids as front lines moved through densely built towns. Soviet high-altitude parachutists Nina Pronyushkina and Elvira Fomacheva pose with their pressure suits, helmets, and parachute rigs in Odessa Oblast, Ukrainian SSR, circa 1977. Stratospheric jumps required sealed suits and oxygen systems to survive the thin air. USS Yorktown crosses San Francisco Bay on September 15, 1943. Her flight deck packed with Jeeps, Dodge WC Series trucks, and other vehicles being ferried to the Pacific. Carriers weren't just for aircraft. Wartime logistics turned them into floating cargo decks between combat sorties. The LZ-129. Hindenburg flies over Berlin's Olympiastadion during the opening of the 1936 Olympic Games, staged by Nazi Germany as a global propaganda showcase. A Wehrmacht Army officer inspects a captured Thompson M 1928 submachine gun, an American .45 ACP weapon famous for its high rate of fire and drum/box magazines. Captured Thompsons were often reissued by German units when ammunition. Hitler Youth recruits practice firefighting drills in 1933. The same year, the Nazis took power and rapidly expanded the organization into a state-run pipeline for discipline and indoctrination. A mud-caked Canadian infantryman, Tommy, trudges back from the front in 1918, wearing a steel Brodie helmet and hauling full kit through shell-churned roads. For troops on the Western Front, mud wasn't just misery. It crippled movement, swallowed equipment. A captured British Universal, Bren, carrier rebuilt by Germany into a makeshift tank destroyer. The Panzerjäger Bren 731E with an anti-tank gun mounted on the tiny track chassis. Workers build the San Pedro Harbor breakwater in 1904, part of the massive project launched in 1899 that turned an exposed coastline into what became the Port of Los Angeles. The crane is dropping multi-ton rock to form an artificial barrier that calms surf. While we're looking at these photos, write in the comments, which picture did you like the most and why? 1919, Sligo Branch. A freight train's air brakes failed on a steep downgrade. It became a runaway and derailed on a sharp curve. 19 cars piled up. Engineer William Callan, 36, was killed when the locomotive overturned and trapped him. Soho, New York, 1955. 4 women pose while sampling a 9-foot baguette outside a shop. Basically a publicity stunt you could eat. The loaf is longer than most cars were wide. Early 1900s, Mount Washington, New Hampshire. A railway worker rides a tiny cog slide cart down the steep Mount Washington cog railway line to get off the mountain fast. It's a 1-seat gravity ride on one of the world's steepest rack railways. June 22, 1941. Soldiers of Germany's 9th Infantry Division, 57th Infantry Regiment, step past Soviet border marker 4/95 on day 1 of Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. The attack opened the Eastern Front. March 1936. Men row a boat down Market Street in Kittanning, Pennsylvania, during the Great Flood that swamped towns across the Northeast. The disaster was fueled by heavy rain on melting snow, sending rivers over their banks in multiple states. November 20, 1944, near Belfort. German prisoners with hands raised are rounded up by France's 2nd Bataillon de Choc after house-to-house fighting, photographed by the U.S. Signal Corps. The Bataillon de Choc were elite French commandos used for shock assaults in the liberation of France. Inside a Tiger tank's ammo rack, even inert rounds could be crushed or split by shock and spall when the armor was hit. Damaged stowage like this is why ammo hits in WWI tanks often turned a single penetration into a catastrophic fire. August 1943. An F-6F Hellcat hit a low-altitude spin and slammed into the aft flight deck of the escort carrier USS Charger, ending up lodged on the stern. With essentially zero altitude to recover, this kind of mistake was usually fatal. Yet the pilot survived. Debris field of Romanian Air Force MiG-21 Red 6905 after a training crash near Tsundere, Yalomița, on 1997. Both the instructor pilot and student ejected safely, but the jet was destroyed. William Bill Power, often linked to the alias William Street Power, rode with the Dalton Gang and was killed on October 5, 1892, during the Coffeyville, Kansas raid, when armed townspeople stopped the gang's double bank robbery. During filming of The Godfather, 1972, Marlon Brando often relied on cue cards instead of memorizing dialogue, so the crew hid lines on placards around the set. In this shot, Robert Duvall is literally wearing a large cue card to feed Brando his next lines. Health Day at German Township High School in McClellantown, Pennsylvania, 1929. Hundreds of students massed on the field for coordinated calisthenics as part of the era's school health and physical fitness campaigns. Cars once filled the forecourt of Notre Dame before Paris built an underground parking garage beneath the square in the 1960s. A 1965 excavation for that project uncovered major archaeological remains. Manhattan apartment listings from the 1930s show furnished rooms advertised for about $6 per week, with perks like steam heat, bath, and electricity included. A dual-purpose room family fallout shelter demo from the 1960s, showing how Cold War civil defense tried to sell shelters as normal dens you could live in after nuclear fallout. Seddon Crater, Nevada Test Site, a 1962 underground nuclear shot about 100 kilotons that blasted out a crater about 390 meters wide and 100 meters deep. An American air crewman after a long-range bombing mission over Germany, circa 1944 to 1945, wearing a flight helmet and goggles, with target and return notes written on his hand. Some U.S. Army Air Force's raids lasted 7 hours or more, with crews facing flak. May 1919, Dr. W. H. Chase displays an enormous Alaskan brown bear hide in Cordova, Alaska, from a bear taken on nearby Hinchinbrook Island. Brown bears in coastal Alaska can reach around 10 feet when standing, and their hides look like rugs the size of a wall. Tiananmen Square, after the 1989 crackdown, troops patrol a debris-strewn plaza, following the Chinese government's forceful suppression of the pro-democracy protest movement. The events in Beijing triggered mass arrests. 1988. 2 American businessmen smash a Japanese-made car in a parking lot, a Buy American protest during the decade when Japanese automakers surged in United States market share. The scene reflects the trade and auto industry backlash that pushed for import limits. Bonnie Parker, photographed in 1933, was one half of the Bonnie and Clyde duo that carried out robberies across the central United States during the Great Depression and killed several people, including police officers. During the Great Depression, Al Capone funded a Chicago soup kitchen that served free meals to unemployed people as public pressure mounted on city relief. The kitchen opened in 1930 and became part charity. Lepa Radic was a 17-year-old Yugoslav partisan captured in February 1943 and publicly executed after refusing to betray her comrades. She was later awarded the Yugoslav Order of the People's Hero, one of the youngest recipients. Frank Eaton, 1860 to 1958, nicknamed Pistol Pete, was a frontier lawman and deputy United States Marshal in Indian Territory, later becoming the inspiration for Oklahoma State University's famous mascot. December 6, 1912. The painted bust of Queen Nefertiti was found at Amarna by the German Oriental Company excavation, led by Ludwig Borchardt, in the workshop of sculptor Thutmose. The bust was taken to Germany and has been displayed in Berlin ever since. Oliver was a chimpanzee taken from Central Africa around 1957, whose upright walking habit and unusual appearance sparked human-ape hybrid rumors in the 1970s. Genetic testing later confirmed he was a normal chimpanzee with 48 chromosomes. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crashed in the Andes in October 1972. After 72 days in freezing isolation, only 16 of the 45 people on board survived. Rescue happened only after Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa crossed the mountains on foot for 10 days and reached help. Blanche Barrow was captured in August 1933 at age 22, weighing about 81 pounds, after the Dexter, Iowa gun battle where Buck Barrow was fatally wounded and she lost sight in one eye from flying glass. She served about 6 years in prison. In May 1934, a Dust Bowl storm stripped Great Plains topsoil and carried it east, with dust falling on cities like Chicago, Washington, and New York, and reaching ships out in the Atlantic. In 1972, French speleologist Michel Siffre lived alone in a cave for about 180 days with no clocks or sunlight to study human circadian rhythms. Cut off from time cues, he lost track of days, and his sleep-wake cycle drifted far from 24 hours. Vietnam, 1967. A tunnel rat checks a .45 caliber pistol before crawling into a Viet Cong tunnel to clear it by hand. These missions meant moving through pitch-black, booby-trapped passages only wide enough for one soldier, often fighting at point-blank range. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up mostly of Japanese-American soldiers, became one of the most highly decorated units in United States military history for its size and length of service in World War II. In 1965, 6 Tongan teenagers became shipwrecked on the uninhabited island of Atta and survived for 15 months until they were rescued in 1966. They organized a rota for food, water, and watch duty, and even built a handmade guitar to keep morale up. A nuclear bomb sits on a loading cradle, photographed in the early atomic era when these weapons had to be physically hoisted and fitted into aircraft by hand. After 1945, nuclear arms shifted global strategy toward deterrence. Aeroflot Flight 6502, Tupolev crashed during an approach in 1986 after the captain attempted a blind landing with the cockpit windows curtained, relying only on instruments. The aircraft hit the ground short of the runway, and about 70 people were killed. Longueval, France, World War I. An Australian driver gives his horse water at an Australian Comforts Fund stall while soldiers wait their turn for a drink. Australian War Memorial photo E00076 documents the everyday logistics that kept men. Amsterdam, 1977. Otto Frank, aged 88, unveils a statue of his daughter Anne Frank, whose wartime diary became one of the most widely read accounts of the Holocaust. Otto was the only member of the immediate family to survive Auschwitz. 1980 in Vietnam, a farmer works a flooded field while the wreckage of a United States Air Force B-52 Stratofortress sits in the water behind him. The photo captures how air war debris became part of the everyday landscape long after the fighting ended. 1955, a German soldier embraces his mother during the homecoming of the 10,000 when the Soviet Union released the last large group of German prisoners of war and internees. Many had spent almost a decade in captivity after World War II before returning to West Germany. Sarajevo, September 14, 1992. A Bosnian girl waits at Lyon Cemetery for a funeral during the siege of the city. Civilians often carried rifles for self-defense, as shelling and sniper fire made even burials deadly. Riga, 1991. Stacks of Jewish religious books hidden in the attic of the city's last synagogue, preserved through decades when Jewish life in Latvia had been devastated by the Holocaust and later suppressed under Soviet rule. Saigon, April 29, 1975. A helicopter lifts CIA personnel and Vietnamese partners from the CIA station at 22 Gia Long Street during the final hours before the city fell. The rooftop extractions became one of the defining images of the end of the Vietnam War. Memorial Day 1945 at La Cambre, Normandy. French teenager Hélène Chapelle and her mother kneel at the grave of James Simonian, killed in the 1944 invasion, while she reads a letter sent by his mother to be read at the burial site. Paris Commune, 1871. Communards build barricades and run the city for about 10 weeks after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. The experiment ended in Bloody Week in late May, when government troops retook Paris and crushed the uprising. Environmental protest outside a smoke-belching plant. Demonstrators wear masks and hold signs like, "If you are not part of the solution, you are part of the pollution," and "Beware of the air you breathe." 1938. A shore-based tuna hunt, with fishermen packed on rocks using long gaffs and poles as hooked fish thrash in the surf. Before modern purse seines and factory fleets, landing big tuna often meant brute force at the waterline. Boeing's Visual Space Flight Simulator, circa 1960s. A pilot flies a cockpit mock-up while the moon and a spacecraft are projected to rehearse lunar orbit, lunar landing, and rendezvous profiles. Santa Fe Springs, California, 1928. The Bellevue. #1 oil well blows out, throwing a towering pillar of flame that ignites nearby derricks and destroys equipment across the field. Contemporary reports said losses quickly reached hundreds of thousands of dollars. Vienna, July 17, 1938. Two soldiers swim a machine gun up the Danube by pushing a small raft with their legs, turning the river into a moving firing platform. It was staged during a Vienna police lifeboat race to show how weapons could be floated. Moscow, November 3, 1957. Soviet space dog Maleshka poses in a pressure suit beside a transparent helmet used for training and testing. That same day, Sputnik 2 launched with Laika on board, making her the first living creature to orbit Earth. June 1944. A view from a landing craft in Operation Neptune, the seaborne assault phase of the Normandy landings, as troops and vehicles pushed toward the French coast. 1943. Engineers build the huge Conundrum Drum, designed to unreel fuel pipeline across the seabed as part of the Pluto project. It turned oil logistics into a mechanical problem. Wind the pipe like a cable, tow it out, and feed the invasion. Nottinghamshire coal mine, 1907 to 1914. Miners crowd into a cramped underground lift, one of the fastest and most dangerous ways to move men through deep shafts. The brick-lined tunnel and waiting coal tub show how industrial the underground already was before World War I. KGB officers haul a suspected spy into custody near Moscow, 1985, turning a street corner into a sudden full-body tackle. The scene captures how Cold War arrests could look less like paperwork and more like a fast, physical snatch. Moscow, 1924. Lenin's first mausoleum was a temporary wooden structure thrown up on Red Square within days of his death. Architect Alexei Shchusev designed it so fast it still became the blueprint for the granite mausoleum that replaced it in 1930. New York City, 1943. Police booked these women as fortune tellers because charging money to tell fortunes was treated as fraud under city law. The lineup photo shows how common street divination was and how aggressively it was policed. Baghdad, November 27, 1990. Muhammad Ali met Saddam Hussein during the Gulf crisis to press for the release of Americans being held in Iraq and Kuwait. Days later, Ali flew out of Iraq with 15 freed U.S. citizens. On August 20, 1939, the New York Times Magazine ran a lifestyle style piece about Hitler's mountain home, mentioning gooseberry pie, chocolate, afternoon naps, and long walks in the mountains. It appeared 12 days before Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. April 29, 1975. On the USS Midway, sailors pushed helicopters worth about $10 million into the sea to clear the deck for a tiny Cessna carrying South Vietnamese pilot Quang Le and his family. The Cessna landed safely and the crew pulled the plane aboard. February 12, 1957. A major fire ripped through Jaguar's Browns Lane factory, leaving production halls filled with charred car bodies and ruined equipment. The blaze wiped out a large part of the plant, but Jaguar moved fast to rebuild and restart production. Limburg, Netherlands, 1970. The Meuse River flooded the countryside, turning a road into a narrow causeway where a truck ferried evacuees while a cyclist rode through the shallow water. More than one-third of the Netherlands lies below sea level. This is a vintage group photo of uniformed servicemen, reposted as a fun fact meme with a dramatic claim about an American prisoner of war in Osaka, escaping execution by saying a quoted line. Pelgedian Gendon, Mongolia's leader in the mid-1930s, was one of the rare communists who openly resisted Joseph Stalin's pressure over Mongolia's purges and policies. He was later arrested in Moscow and executed in 1937 during the Great Purge. 1914. A Mississippi River fisherman's family lived on a one-room shanty boat anchored below the railroad bridge at Louisiana, Missouri, using the river as their front yard and workplace. These houseboats were a common low-cost home for river people, built to drift. Scranton, Pennsylvania, February 20th, 1906. A house on South Fifth Avenue began sinking into the abandoned workings of the Bellevue mine, a dramatic case of coal mine subsidence. 2 families escaped as the building slowly collapsed. Nobody was killed. Stalingrad, February 2nd, 1943. Red Army soldiers celebrate after Germany's 6th Army surrendered, ending one of the bloodiest battles in history. The victory destroyed a major German force and became a turning point that shifted the momentum of the war on the Eastern Front. After the 1929 stock market crash, crowds rushed to pull their savings from banks, triggering bank runs that could collapse even healthy institutions in a single day. London, 1919. An ice wagon moves through a pea-souper smog, the thick yellow-brown mix of coal smoke and fog that could cut visibility to a few meters. Before clean air laws, winter mornings like this were a routine hazard in the city. Carl McCunn, an American photographer, was left alone in the Alaskan wilderness in 1981 after a drop-off when he failed to arrange a return pickup, and he slowly ran out of food and ammunition. A search plane later passed overhead. Karachev, Bryansk region, 1943. A Soviet conscript is hugged by his family moments before leaving for the front. In the middle of the Eastern Front's deadliest year, farewells like this often meant an uncertain return. A grunge-era rock musician sits backstage in a flannel shirt, wiping away tears right after an intense live set. The photo captures the raw emotional crash that can hit performers the moment the noise stops. Helen Keller, deafblind since infancy, is photographed at age 75 doing kitchen work, a rare everyday glimpse of her private life. By then, she was world famous as an author and disability rights advocate and had spent decades raising money. 1907. Tunnel workers stand inside a huge circular bore, hammering and bolting the curved steel ribs that hold the lining in place. With no hard hats or modern machines in sight, this kind of underground construction was powered by muscle, hand tools. In the 1960s, United States newspaper ads sold live squirrel monkeys by mail for $18.95, promising free cage and home delivery. This kind of trade helped spread zoonotic diseases and fueled exotic pet demand before tighter wildlife. This experimental firefighting suit was designed to spray water over the wearer, creating a moving water shield against heat and embers. It never became standard gear because it was bulky, depended on a constant water supply and pressure. Félicette was a French stray cat launched by France on October 18, 1963, aboard a Veronique rocket and recovered alive after a suborbital flight with electrodes recording her brain activity. She remains the only cat known to have gone to space and returned. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew solo from New York to Paris in the Spirit of St. Louis, a single-engine monoplane built for range, not comfort. The flight took 33 hours and 30 minutes nonstop, and the cockpit had no forward window because fuel tanks filled the nose. 1932. A ransom note from the Lindbergh kidnapping case ordered the family to baby safe, promised instructions later, and demanded they act accordingly. The crime triggered one of the most famous manhunts in United States history and led to the federal Lindbergh Law. Hiroshima after the atomic bombing. Entire neighborhoods were flattened into a field of rubble, with only a few reinforced concrete buildings left standing. The blast and firestorm destroyed most of the city near the hypocenter and killed tens of thousands of people in 1945. Mountain Meadows, Utah. In 1857, a Mormon militia and Paiute allies killed about 120 immigrants in what became known as the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Subscribe to the channel. Every day, there is a selection of real historical photos.